I was told at one point in my personal training career that we needed to tell our clients they needed to eat 9 to 11 servings of fruit and vegetables in a day. Forget 5. And I didn't even know anybody in the industry that could eat that many fruit and vegetables, let alone try to afford it, and try to prepare it and try not to throw food away at the end of the week. And we were saying like it needs to be organic, and you need to have like the top soil, amazing soil to grow this stuff in, which we never questioned. Like, well, where are you going to get good soil from? But it's interesting to consider those ideas. Everything that you mentioned, the 5 a day and the fiber, these ideas are so ubiquitous. Everybody knows that you should do those things. Everybody knows that vegetables are healthy for you. You need fruit. You should eat fruit 365 days out of the year, even if it doesn't grow anywhere near you all year round. So where did some of these ideas originate? Are they part of our evolution, or are they something that somebody came up with arbitrarily that we just jumped on board with?
I guess, I mean, my opinion now, having done this book and done the research, I think in my mind it starts with rejecting fat. The idea of Ansel Keys and others, and then the way that influenced American food policy in the 1970s. If you reject fat because you believe wrongly that it's the root of heart disease and so on, and blocking up your arteries, once you reject fat, what are you going to do? And likewise, the meat that goes with that fat. So where are you going to get energy from? From carbohydrates. So that's where that came from. Where are you going to get your nutrients from? Well, I guess that's the 5 a day story, or at least 5 a day, or as you say, even more than that. And if you count that up, if you say 7 portions of fruit and veg a day for an adult, as we say in the book, for a family of 4, that's 150 portions a week of fruit and veg, which our guidelines describe as being a great source of vitamins and nutrients. It seems to me that it's not a great source if you have to eat it 150 times a week for a family. It's quantity rather than quality. And then, of course, they throw in the fiber as well. So along with the myth about fat leading to heart disease, there's this idea that you need fiber to kind of keep your insides working and stop getting clogged up. And in fact, as we say in the book, it does the opposite. It if anything, it clogs you up. It provides no nutritional value. But I think that the rot starts with ignoring evolution. No one seems to put that into these, into the context of these dietary studies. They ignore evolution, in which we thrived on a meaty, fatty diet. They ignore that, and then you go down this path of, well, what are you going to eat instead?
The underlying issue is that the guidelines are based on nutrition studies, which are seriously flawed. We cover that in a chapter called Science Fiction, which shows that the guidelines are based on epidemiological studies. So that's looking at a group of people, seeing what they eat and seeing what diseases they end up with. So you can show an association from those kinds of studies, but you can never prove a cause. And so the studies that they're based on are seriously flawed. And so as a result, the actual guidelines are incorrect too.
Wow. Well, that's such a good point. And if you really stop and think about it, it's so ridiculous. If you stop and think about it, what were the nutritional guidelines designed to do? They were designed to help reverse heart disease. What is the #1 killer in 2025 in America? I'm sure it's the same in the UK, of people in our country. It is still heart disease. The #1 killer. It's not like, oh, we fixed heart disease, but unfortunately now we have an obesity issue and we have a diabetes problem and mental health is going south, but at least we fixed the one thing. We didn't even fix the one thing that the nutritional guidelines were supposed to fix, and we have all these other problems. It's ludicrous.
Yeah. Diabetes and being overweight and obese have roughly trebled since the food guidelines were put in place some 50 years ago.
And not to mention Alzheimer's disease.
Many people think that they're the cause of the rise in obesity and diabetes, but like any epidemiological study, you can't prove that.
Yeah. Well said. I like when you guys mentioned evolution. You guys kind of say something that I really like. You say that we kind of have a habit of saying like we evolved to eat meat, but you kind of phrase that a bit differently in the chapter where you talk about our evolution. Can you explain why you decided to reframe that a little bit?
Yeah, so we say we evolved because we ate meat rather than we evolved to eat meat. The anthropological evidence is really clear on that. Since we split from the chimpanzee line roughly 6 million years ago, which is when our hominin ancestors first started eating animal foods, it was eating brain and bone marrow, which they scavenged from kill sites, which supplied the essential nutrients needed for brain growth. And in that time, our brains have roughly trebled in size. As we say in the book, it's gone from the size of a split bread roll to the size of a small sourdough loaf, whereas the chimpanzee brain has stayed exactly the same. And there have been many other biological changes at the same time. Our guts have shrunk. Overall, the human gut has shrunk, but the small intestine has lengthened. It's the colon that's become much smaller. And the energy that was freed up by the change in the gut size could then power the growth of the brain. Because the human brain uses a lot of energy. It's only 2% of our body weight, but it uses up 20% of our energy. And so it's actually eating animal foods that triggered that change. And then as we became more intelligent, we became more skilled at obtaining animal foods, for example, using tools and hunting. And then you get a vicious circle. Virtuous circle developing where you get better and better at accessing animal foods. And so your brain grows even more. But sorry, surprisingly, in the last 10,000 years, since we took up agriculture and introduced grains and other foods that weren't in our diet pre-agriculture, our brains have shrunk in size by about 7%. Some say it could be the change in diet, the fact that we eat less animal food now, but yeah, we don't know for sure.
It's a really good point. Those anatomical changes are really important to point out to people. And I think of the many, like you said, there's so many of them. We could talk about, babies that are born, our brain size, our gut size, like you mentioned. But I'll even just point out, like, look at our shoulder joints. We don't hang in trees the way that our closest relatives do, but we can throw way better than they can. And so what would that suggest? We don't need to hang out in trees. We don't need that vegetation, but we need to throw things. We have a hypermobile shoulder joint that allows us to be able to do that. And that's one of, again, many, many, many different anatomical changes that's really important to point out for people that aren't considering that.
Some people say that we don't have the teeth of carnivorous animals, but what we say is that we didn't need the teeth of carnivorous animals because we developed tools. We can use knives and other implements to process our food, to cut it, which is a type of food processing.
Yeah, just like Dr. Bill Schindler says, it's sharp rock. If you have a sharp rock, you're good. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that also chimps and gorillas and other primates that are largely herbivorous or completely herbivorous often have really big canine teeth because it's not for catching and eating prey. It's for social use and shows of aggression and so on, dominance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of my favorite chapters, we've already mentioned it, of fiber, the idea that we need fiber in our diets. I love that chapter. Can you explain why not only that is not true, but why so many people might be benefited from removing fiber and not trying to just eat more fiber than they're already eating?
So we call that chapter Fiber, a Natural Junk Food, which is what it is. To start with, fiber isn't a nutrient that's necessary for humans. We can't digest it. We don't need it. eating a high fiber diet can actually wash nutrients out of your body. It reduces the bioavailability of vitamins and minerals. And some studies have shown that it can also leach protein out of your diet. So you're losing micronutrients and macronutrients. Fiber causes bloating. It's unpleasant for the person eating the fiber, and it could be unpleasant even for others in the vicinity.
There's constipation.
Yeah, and then there's the whole idea that fiber helps constipation and fiber can reduce your risk of bowel cancer. Neither of those are true. The studies on which those are based are not good studies. They're epidemiological type studies. There are no controlled trials, which are good types of studies, which show that fiber is beneficial in reducing the risk of bowel cancer. Most of the big studies show either no benefit, a small benefit, or fiber can, in some studies, show that it's actually harmful. And then with the constipation idea, which is believed even by medical professionals that fiber aids constipation. There's been a really good study that was done in Singapore where they took a group of people and cut out fiber completely from their diet. And every single one of them had an improvement in bloating and constipation. What those researchers said, what they likened it to was a traffic jam. If you have a traffic jam, adding more cars will only make the situation worse. It's the same with constipation. If you have a bowel that's already packed with feces, adding more fiber is just going to make that worse.